This is the WJW podcast, brought to you by the Washington Jewish Week and Mid-Atlantic Media. Welcome to the WJW podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Trudler, editor of the Washington Jewish Week. I'm joined today by Rachel Goldberg-Polin. Rachel's son, Hersh Goldberg-Polin, was attending the Nova Music Festival in southern Israel on October 7th when he was kidnapped by Hamas during the brutal terrorist attacks that took place on that fateful day. Now, 7 months later, Hamas is still holding Hersh hostage. Rachel, thank you for taking the time to chat.
Thank you for having me.
You have been an incredibly strong and dedicated advocate, not only on behalf of Hersh himself, but essentially on behalf of all the hostages and their families. And you've become a very public face as the effort to secure their release has progressed over the past number of months. You met with world leaders, you met with Pope Francis. Can you describe for us your advocacy efforts, why you feel it's so important to be such a public and courageous voice, not only for Hersh, but for all the hostages and their families? You've spoken at the UN, you've spoken at rallies. Time magazine named you one of the 100 most influential leaders of 2024. I know all these are accolades that you're not seeking and that you're not looking for, but yet you've taken this mantle of being a primary spokesperson. And I'm curious if you can explain to us why it is you've taken on that role.
Well, I think right away, just simply because we speak English well, because both John and I were born and raised in the States, and we only moved to Israel when we were almost 40, each of us. I think that we were approached right away to talk about what happened on October 7th. We also, once we found out that Hersh had been kidnapped and that we knew that his dominant left arm had been blown off during the abduction, during the attack prior to the abduction, we really felt that it was a question of life or death, of having to publicize who he is, what happened to him, in the hopes that he would get treatment. That was, our initial reason why after 48 hours, we ended up going public with Hersh's story. And the reality is that the hostage cohort, the original hostage cohort, which was 252 people who had been dragged across the border that day, a lot of them didn't have a way to share their stories or their identities. And so, and I do think, like it or not, we are a family of, meaning the broader hostage cohort is a family of people who are suffering the same angst, misery, and fears. And it just makes sense that, the people who could speak in certain languages sort of took that on. And we ended up becoming, a voice in the English-speaking world. And I do feel very much, as I think all the hostage families, now we have 132 families, we try to speak for each other. I mean, we use our platforms to try to educate as many people as possible. Who are these people being held? Many people are not aware that of the 132 hostages still being held, they represent 25 different nations. They are Jews, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and Hindus. They range in age. There's an 86-year age range. It's a very diverse and unique group of human beings who are being held. And I think that story gets lost. I think there's sometimes an attempt to make this into a homogenous, monolithic group of people, which I think does a disservice and an injustice to the people who are there.
I think the last point you made is pretty poignant. I think a lot of people do think about or perceive to be a homogeneous group, but you're right. There's a tremendous amount of diversity, different voices, different countries, and you're definitely all amplifying that in a very poignant way. I guess my follow-up question would be, we can only imagine what you and your family are going through, what you and the other hostage families are grappling with on a daily basis, unfortunately. Why do you think you have that intestinal fortitude, that inner strength, um, being mindful of what you just said in terms of the importance of speaking out, but how do you think you have that strength, and that inner strength and faith, to go out there in such a public fashion when, honestly, I'm sure there are a lot of people who would prefer to deal with things in a more private manner?
Well, I think there are a few answers. I think, first of all, I think it's a very primal, innate, reflexive response when a parent thinks that their child is in danger, or when a loved one thinks that their partner or father or brother or spouse are in danger. So there isn't so much choice necessarily involved initially, because it's natural that my only son is in danger. I'm going to try to save him. The second thing I'll say is, a lot of it is a huge decision. I'm sure you've heard me say before, every morning I get up and, I say Moda Ani, which I think I've always loved, that traditional Jewish prayer that many people say upon waking. When I learned it, when I wasn't raised in a religious home, so I only learned that prayer when I was 12 or 13 in 8th grade. And I remember reading it in English and being fascinated by the idea at the end when it says, Rabba emunatecha, that like, great is your faith in me. That God is giving me back my life, because upon waking, sleeping, they say, is 1/60th of death. So you have kind of a whisper of a dance with death when we sleep. So when you're awaking, it's because God is giving you back your life, because God has faith in you and is giving you another day to do something here on this big blue marble. And then I say to myself, now, when I wake up, now pretend to be human. And it is a conscious effort each day to get out of bed and put on this costume of a human being. And I say, you mentioned strength. I feel like I spray on this fake strength, because I don't think I necessarily have any strength, but I have to run, and I have to try to save Hersh, and I have to try to save whoever else can be saved who's still there, and doing what I feel like doing, which is curling up in a ball and weeping, because it's such a indescribable torment that we go through each day. That won't help them. So I've got to fake it. Even if I'm not feeling it, I've got to get up and I've got to run. But then a huge part of our strength comes from what you mentioned, which is we are faithful people. We are religious people. I get up every morning and I daven, and I daven mincha, both in the morning and the afternoon. And it is something that has anchored me during this time of complete ambiguous trauma. It's something that has, I don't know how I would have been able to maybe manage it without doing that. And throughout the day, as I feel anxious, or if I get nervous, or if I'm getting fearful, I have my book of Tehillim, my book of Psalms that I open up. And I mean, my team knows, yesterday, our team, I was having an extra, things are just very fragile right now with what's happening. And I said, I'm going to talk to God. And I grabbed my Tehillim and I, went to another room in the office. And the last thing I'll say is this incredible team, these human beings who are surrounding us and holding us up when we're feeling weak, and when we're feeling scared. We, even within this horrifying, dark chapter that is so elegantly painful, there is such beauty that God has given us, and this team of people who surround us, who are the kindest, sharpest, most intelligent, savvy, and graceful people. And they're so good to us, and they give us strength. So I think it's a mambo combo of all of those different components. And on different days, it's more of one than the other. And, and the last thing is that, the great Winston Churchill once said, when you're going through hell, keep walking. And so we just have to keep moving, because just staying still, then you're just stuck in hell.
Yeah, I think that notion of faith and definitely turning to God is something that I know I personally do regularly, but I think there are a whole host of people in the Jewish community and beyond who have turned to God at these times when perhaps they don't ordinarily do so, because I think there is some broader recognition of the need for some divine assistance here, in addition to the advocacy efforts that you guys have undertaken and are doing really magnificently. That idea of Rabbi Munatecha, it's something that resonates, I think, with a lot of people. And thank you for articulating that.
Well, and what was helpful for me is that I've been davening daily for years. So I felt like I had this pre-existing relationship. So it wasn't, I think whatever people need and however people turn to the universe when they're in a time of crisis, whatever works for everyone, there's no judgment. But it was helpful for me that I felt like I have this relationship with this idea of God. So it helped me, because it wasn't, now I'm in crisis and who are you? And I'm going to start trying to build a relationship.
Okay. I mean, you basically alluded to it, but the darkness of that day of October 7th, one of the darkest in our history, quite honestly. It was something that impacted all of us, but I think for you and your family and the other hostage families as well, it impacted you obviously in a very profound and personal way. I'm wondering if you can kind of just take us through that day as it relates to Hersh, any interactions you had with Hersh as this was unfolding in real time, and how you were dealing with it on your end, being so far away.
Sure. So, well, I'll back up just a little bit to say that a couple of years ago, Hersh shared with us that he was not going to be keeping Shabbat the way that we keep Shabbat, which, was like, at the moment, was a huge blow and very hard for us. When, as I mentioned, I didn't grow up religious. And so to take something that for me has so much value and so much meaning and is such a treasure, and to give it to your children and then have someone say, I don't 100% digest it the way that you do. That was like a very difficult thing for us 2 years ago when he shared that with us. But he said in the same breath, he said, but I will never disrespect you. And I thought, how's that going to work? But how it worked is that, I never saw Hersh without a kippah. I never, in our home, of course in our home, but even if he came to visit me at work, if he met me at the grocery store, when we went traveling, he always had his kippah on. But he also, when, I would hear him in our house, if you're not in the kitchen, you can still hear when someone's washing, right before they make hamotzi. I would hear the splash, 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 splash. And I asked him about a year ago, I said, why are you still washing? Like, if you're not, doing, all this stuff. And he said, first of all, I'm in your house. Of course, I would never not wash here. And he said, the same way I would never be anywhere with you without a kippah. Like, a kippah is to show that you respect some things above you. You'll always be above me. And he, on Sukkot this year, the first week of October 7th, I came home one day and it was a boiling hot day and there was tons of noise outside. There's a huge renovation happening next door to us. And he was out in the sukkah and I opened the glass door. I said, what are you doing out here? He said, Mama, it's Chol HaMoed Sukkot. What do you think? I'm not eating in the sukkah. But the most important thing is that for the last 2 years, we are a family that goes to shul Friday night and Shabbat morning. And Hersh has continued to come to shul with us. And when you're not keeping Shabbat, it's kind of pretty heavy to keep coming to shul, especially Shabbat morning when, in Israel, I mean, it starts at 8:30 and whatever. And I asked him at one point last year, why do you keep coming to shul? And he said, I don't want Dada to have to sit alone, because we go to shul with a mechitza, and so the girls sit with me, and he didn't want John to have to sit alone. So all of that is just to sort of like explain, because what happened on the 6th is we all went to shul together for Simchat Torah. And Hersh had said to us before shul, he said, I'm coming with you to shul and to Shabbat dinner. We were walking to friends after shul. He said, but I'm bringing my backpack, because after dinner, Honor and I are going to go do something fun. We're going to go camp out somewhere. Honor was his best friend from 3rd grade, from childhood. And we said, fine. So he had brought his camping backpack. We went to shul. Everyone danced with the Torah. Hersh danced with the Torah. People were excited to see him, because he had been gone for 9 weeks this summer, doing a trip around Europe by himself to 6 different countries, to 6 different music festivals. He's wild about music festivals. And we went to eat at our friends. And after around 11 o'clock, he kissed John, he kissed me, and he turned around in the doorway of, where we were eating at this family. And he looked at me very casually and he said, love you, see you tomorrow. And that was 216 nights ago. The next morning, October 7th, I was having a cup of tea in our kitchen. John had left for shul at 7:30 in the morning, because it was Simchat Torah, and John is the gabbai at our shul, which, as you know, hardest day of the year for the gabbai, Simchat Torah. Definitely. So he had left at 7:30. For me personally, that was a little bit too early. So I had said, I'll come later with the girls. Right around 8 o'clock, we heard the sirens going off here in Jerusalem, the bomb sirens. So I ran to wake up the girls, and we got into our bomb shelter. And the protocol is that you wait 10 minutes, and that if you don't hear anything suspicious, you can come out. We didn't hear anything. We came out. Normally, I don't use my phone on Shabbat, and we didn't, we also don't use computers, radios, TV, whatever. So we had no idea what was going on. But I knew that the boys had been sleeping out, that they were camping out somewhere, and I didn't know where. Hersh had just turned 23 on October 3rd. He had just come back from 9 weeks in Europe. I didn't say, tell me your coordinates, where you're going to be. I just said, fine, I'll see you tomorrow. So I said to the girls, I have to turn on my phone, because I have to make sure that Hersh is okay. It's pikuach nefesh. I want to make sure that they're all right. And I turned on my phone right at, I think it was 8:20. And in the WhatsApp group that John, Hersh, and I have together, 2 messages popped up that had come in simultaneously at 8:11. The first one said, I love you. And the second one said, I'm sorry. And, as soon as I saw that, as any parent, you can imagine your own parent, my throat closed, my stomach clenched up, and, I knew something horrible was unfolding, and I knew he knew something horrible was unfolding. And I knew he knew we'd be in pain, and he was apologizing. And what we came to find out is that he and Honor were at the Nova Festival when the massacre began. They ended up in a bomb shelter, one of the roadside bomb shelters that measured 8 feet by 5 feet, very, very small. There were 29 young people smashed into that tiny space together. Hamas came to the doorway and started to throw in hand grenades, which Honor was standing in the doorway, repelling them very quickly, picking them up, throwing them out. We actually have dash cam footage of him doing that. And he managed to successfully repel 7 of the hand grenades, and the 8th one, while it was in his hand, exploded and killed him. And then Hamas came to the doorway and threw in 3 more hand grenades, which detonated and caused a ton of carnage. And then they just stood in the doorway, spraying the room with machine gun fire. Most of those young people were dead. Some of them were lucky enough to be trapped under the dead bodies, covered in blood and other things. And so they looked dead. They could pretend to be dead. And it was from those witnesses that we found out what happened next, which is Hamas gunmen entered the bomb shelter. And there were 4 boys who were on the opposite wall who were all wounded, but clearly alive, and they couldn't hide, and they couldn't pretend to be dead. And Hamas ordered these 4 young men to stand up. When Hersh stood up, everyone who was hiding told us that they saw his left arm from the elbow down had been blown off. Hersh and I are both left-handed, so that was his dominant hand. And they were marched out onto a Hamas pickup truck, which headed toward Gaza, and Hersh's last known phone cell signal was at 10:25 in the morning, Shabbat morning, on October 7th. And the following week, we subsequently, while being interviewed by Anderson Cooper, his show on CNN, at the end of the interview, once we were not on air, he said, "I'm going to call you." And he called and he said, "I realized while I was interviewing you that I have footage of your son being abducted." And he had been at the site of the Nova Festival trying to do a documentary, and soldiers who were gathering evidence there shared with him a GoPro camera that had fallen off of one of the Hamas helmets. And they shared the footage with him, and he shared it with us. So then we were able to see Hersh's abduction of him walking from the bomb shelter at gunpoint and getting himself into the pickup truck. And when he turns to sit down, you see the stump of his left arm where his forearm used to be. And since that time, we live on another planet, and it's very hard to describe. We just keep running. Our friend Ruby Chen, who also has a son who is being held hostage. Tragically, his son Itai is no longer alive, but Ruby always says every day you wake up and you sprint a marathon. And that's what we do every day. We sprint a marathon. And exactly 2 weeks ago today, actually, right, a little bit earlier than the time right now, we had the proof of life video that was released by Hamas of Hersh. That was on day 201. And, a lot of news outlets put before and after photos of Hersh from just a few days before October 7th to the photo of the screenshot of him from 2 weeks ago. And he's almost not recognizable in many ways. But we were, when you're starving and someone offers you a crumb, it's delicious. And so we are grateful that we got to see him and got to hear him, but it was obviously very bittersweet.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Obviously I saw that video as did many, and it's the proof of life is important. Proof of life is important. We're now 7 months post October 7th, and as you mentioned before, there's still 132 or so hostages still being held by Hamas. And I know there was a deal back in, I believe it was November, where there's some hostages released. There's a lot of talk these days about a deal which would involve potentially the release of of perhaps some of the hostages, hopefully all of the hostages. What are your thoughts in terms of these ongoing conversations, which seem to, there are a lot of ebbs and flows, I guess, is the way I perceive it to be. Do you think, you obviously have a very personal stake in this, do you think there's enough being done to bring the hostages home speedily? And if not, what more do you think needs to be done or should be done in order to expedite their safe return to their loved ones?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious that not enough has been done because they're not home. So, and that, I even include myself in that. I mean, I'm not pointing fingers. I think all of us as human beings have failed these 132 cherished souls from all over who are still trapped in this horrific situation. I'm not an expert in geopolitics and I'm not a military tactician, so, I can't speak with authority on those topics, but I think that, first of all, I think there are very few people involved who get to make the decisions. And I feel very much that the hostages and by extension, the hostage families are very much pawns in a game, very much extras in a production. There's a lot of theater, there's a lot of posturing. And I have now grown to understand that the way that the world works is there are lots of interests and lots of equities, and things are tangled and things are complicated. What's not tangled or complicated for us is that we have one interest, and his name is Hersh. And there are 131 other families with Hershes of their own. And so for the hostage families, it's not complicated. But this is clearly a situation where supposedly there is leverage. Everyone has leverage. Are we using our leverage to its maximum? What's complicated about using your leverage? And again, I'm not an expert in these fields, but I think that what I would love to see is humanity. When I met with the Pope and he saw Hersh's video that I shared with him of his abduction, he said to me something so simple. He said, what you've experienced is terrorism, which is the absence of humanity. And I think the tikkun for this is I would like to see everyone be a human. I would really love to see the people in the room make the conscious effort that is very difficult. First of all, to compromise. Compromise is always hard. It's giving up something you hold dear for something you hold even more precious. And I'd like to see the people in the room decide that they're going to care about the suffering of their people more than they hate the other. And that's really hard to give away. It's really hard to give away the hate. And I pray. I even pray for the people who don't wish me well. I pray for everybody who's involved to do the unique thing. I won't even call it the right thing, but the unique thing is just to let the suffering stop. I very much acknowledge, obviously the 132 families are suffering horribly, and there are hundreds of thousands of innocent people in Gaza who are suffering horribly. And I think that in this neck of the woods, we've actually, we've served our suffering quota for now. And I think we all should have some relief and some pressure released from this region. And I think the fastest, most correct way to do that is to send these people home.
Right, Rachel, just one final question, if I may. If you had the ability to speak to Hersh today, to send him a message, to send him an email, a voice note on WhatsApp, what would you say to him?
Well, first of all, I would say to him that I'm so proud of him. I cannot describe how proud I am that he is continuing to walk through this. And that all he has to do is focus on his own inner strength. He doesn't have to worry about us. We're taking care of us. And we're working every single waking moment. There isn't a moment that we are not working to get him home. And as I say to him hundreds of times a day, I love you, stay strong, survive. And it's not advice, and it's not a suggestion, and it's not, just a saying. It's actually sivui. It's a command. I'm commanding you to stay strong and survive. And we will come and we will get you.
Rachel, thank you so much for taking the time to chat. I mean, I know I speak personally, but probably on behalf of a whole host of other people around the world, Jewish community and beyond, when we say that we keep Hersh and your family and all the hostages in our prayers and our tefillot, and really yearn for and look forward to the day when you'll be reunited, and be able to give him that hug that you desperately want to give him and have really missed for so long. So just really thank you for taking the time.
Well, amen, amen, and I hope the next time that we talk, you have him next to me and you can get to meet him. Because I mean, like every mother, I think he's just a wonderful person, and you'll have to see for yourself. I actually think it's legit. It's not just the mother thing.
I am most certainly looking forward to that moment, and I'll take you up on that.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Rachel.